turned his head for less than a minute. One slow breath, one last look at the mountains, 30, maybe 45 seconds with his back to her. When he looked around again, the narrow trail behind him was empty. No movement, no sound, no footprints leaving the path. His hiking partner, his cousin's wife, had simply stopped existing on top of a Montana ridge in broad daylight. And years earlier, in a tiny Colorado town, a man opened a shop in the exact room where another man had vanished, then walked into the mountains himself and never came back. The woman who vanished between two blinks. On July 18, 2007, Deborah Blake moved around her house in Montana's Pinecrest Valley, packing for what should have been an easy summer hike. Snacks, water, extra clothes, a small first aid kit, and the .357 revolver her husband Mark always insisted she carry. They were hosting Mark's cousin Linda and her boyfriend Sean from California, and Deborah loved showing guests her mountains. That day's destination was Raven Ridge Overlook. She'd hiked so often she could describe every bend in the trail. Linda skipped the hike after a heavy night of drinking. Mark, who'd seen Raven Ridge countless times, stayed home to work. Half asleep, he kissed Deborah goodbye and promised to sort dinner. He expected her back by late afternoon. Deborah and Sean drove toward the trailhead, only to find a road crew replacing a culvert. They parked a mile short, near a lone Chevy SUV, and walked the rest. They passed two young men in their 20s by the dig site, fit, outdoorsy types, and headed up. They met the same two men again higher on the trail, exchanged a few words, and kept going. Everything about the morning was ordinary. By late morning, Deborah and Sean reached the overlook, ate a snack, and admired the view. About 30 minutes later, Deborah asked if he was ready to head down. He said yes. They stood, shouldered packs, and started back the way they'd come. After a few steps, Sean stopped, turned back for one last long look at the valley. It took seconds. When he faced the trail again, Deborah wasn't there. At first he thought she'd stepped behind a rock or was playing a joke. The ridge was open, with loose shale and sharp drop-offs. Nowhere to move silently, nowhere to hide without leaving scuffs or disturbed rock. He called her name. Nothing. He walked back and forth along the trail. No answer. No glimpse of color in the brush below. No fresh slide marks. By 1:30 p.m., panic finally cut through disbelief. Sean hurried down to the culvert site. The road crew hadn't seen her. One worker hiked back with him to the car. Empty. By 2 p.m., Deborah was officially reported missing. Mark took the call from a forest officer at home. When she asked if he was Deborah's husband, something in his stomach dropped. He'd been glancing at the clock all afternoon, mentally counting how long the hike should take. "There's been a report she's missing," the officer said. "No way," Mark blurted. Deborah was a strong hiker. Raven Ridge was practically in their backyard. Nothing about it was technical or dangerous. He drove the 20 miles to the trailhead, still half certain this was all a misunderstanding. By the time he arrived, hope was already dying. Searchers were on scene. Deputies, SAR teams, volunteers. Dogs swept the path and the overlook, circling again and again without locking on to a scent trail beyond where Deborah and Sean had last stood. A helicopter with thermal imaging flew grid patterns, looking for a human heat signature in the rocks and timber. It found nothing. For days, teams combed the slopes, checked every gully and ledge, hunted for a single scrap of clothing. They found no blood, no tracks, no sign of a fall. The two young men seen on the trail that morning never came forward, despite a cash reward and national coverage. Sean cooperated fully, answered every question, stayed in touch with detectives, even volunteered to take a polygraph. His story never changed. She was 20 or 30 feet away. He turned his back for less than a minute. When he turned around, she was gone. Years later, Mark would still stand at his kitchen window, staring across the valley at the dark line of Raven Ridge and asking himself how someone could vanish so completely from a place he could see from his own house. The rider who followed his missing man into the mountains. Silver Ridge, Colorado is the kind of mining town people forget exists. Wedged in a narrow valley off the interstate, its boom ended a century ago. By the 1980s, only a couple of hundred residents lived in its shadowed streets. In 1987, Tom Hale ran a tiny bookshop there, kept to himself, and lived with his dog Rufus on the edge of the woods below Prospector Peak. On September 7th, he closed the shop for the day, locked the door, and disappeared. He'd mentioned, vaguely, a trip to Europe. In a town used to drifters coming and going, no one panicked at first. Weeks went by. The shop stayed dark. Tom's dog was gone too. Nearly a year later, on July 31st, 1988, hunters on Republic Ridge, a mile and a half from town, found human bones and a dog skeleton lying together under tattered pieces of green tarp. A revolver lay nearby. Dental records confirmed it was Tom. Forensics showed both man and dog had been shot in the head. When it emerged that Tom had bought the gun 4 days before he disappeared, the sheriff's office closed the case as a suicide. Not everyone believed it. If Tom had gone up there to die, why bring his dog? Why the remnants of a tarp over the remains, as if someone had tried to conceal them? No one had reported hearing gunshots. Ballistics could never conclusively match the bullet to his weapon. For Kevin Reinhardt, a 48-year-old Chicago sports reporter who came to Silver Ridge the following summer, the discovery wasn't closure. It was a hook he couldn't shake. Kevin arrived in 1988 on a 3-month sabbatical, planning to get fit, confront his fear of heights, and write a novel. He rented a small shop for an antique store, only to learn it was the same space Tom's bookstore had occupied. He became obsessed. He interviewed locals, hiked the slopes, and poured everything he learned into a manuscript. His protagonist, Guy Gypsum, was a blend of himself and Tom, a man pulled too deep into someone else's mystery. On Kevin's computer, investigators would later find the last lines he wrote. Guy Gypsum changed into some hiking boots and donned a heavy flannel shirt. He understood Tom now and his motivation. Guy closed the door, then walked off towards the lush, shadowless Colorado forest above. A week after Tom's remains were found, Kevin spent August 7th wandering Silver Ridge, telling people he planned to climb Prospector Peak that afternoon. He was afraid of heights. It was already 4 p.m., and he had no pack or gear. Most people thought he was joking. At 4 p.m., he told his old friend John, who ran the cafe across the street, "If I don't come back, call in the rescue," in a half-playful tone. At 4:30 p.m., someone saw him walking toward the base of the mountain in jeans, a flannel shirt, and trainers. No backpack, no jacket, no torch, no food. He never came back. The search for Kevin became the largest in local history. More than 100 people on foot, dogs, helicopters, ropes across scree and cliffs. Prospector Peak has no real trails. It's riddled with loose rock, hidden shafts, sudden drops, and thick scrub. It can swallow a man without leaving a clue. It did exactly that. After 7 days, with no footprints, no scraps of clothing, and no sign he'd ever set foot on the slopes, authorities called the search off. Next to Kevin's computer, they found a newspaper with the headline about Tom Hale's body being found. Some say Kevin staged his own disappearance, vanishing into his novel. His family rejects that. Others believe both men stumbled on something in those mountains they were never meant to see, and someone else made sure they never talked about it. The simplest explanation, that Kevin, underprepared and overconfident, died somewhere on the mountain and has yet to be found, might be the most likely. But in Silver Ridge, people still talk about the bookstore that lost 2 owners, the mountain that took both men, and the way one writer, trying to understand another man's fate, seemed to step straight into it and disappear.